I'll be presenting on the social movement ACT UP. ACT UP stands for the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. This social movement is a grassroots movement. It was founded in March of 1987 in response to the AIDS pandemic and lack of government intervention. Today, according to ACT UP's website, they are a diverse, nonpartisan group of individuals united in anger and committed to direct action to end the AIDS crisis. We meet with government officials, distribute the latest medical information, we protest and demonstrate. We are not silent. The first quote here is ACT UP's slogan, which is silence equals death. And the second one, which I just thought was pretty interesting, and really speaks to a lot of elements of ACT UP, is if you waste our money, our time, our lives, take one day off from work and turn rage into action. ACT UP began in March 1987 at a meeting at the Lesbian and Gay Community Services Center in downtown Manhattan. United in anger, this movement was formed in response to the social and government neglect and lack of acknowledgement towards the AIDS pandemic. ACT UP is still a prominent social movement today, and ACT UP worked to change the way the government and medical community conducted research to find a treatment for the issue that was affecting the lives of millions. Larry Kramer, an American playwright, is considered the founder of ACT UP. Starting his activism by co-founding the Gay Man's Health Crisis, his anger and frustration toward the AIDS pandemic led him to want to expand his activism and create ACT UP. At his speech in March of 1987 at the Lesbian and Gay Community Centers, Kramer asked 2/3 of the room to stand and said in 5 years they would be dead from AIDS. He used this tactic to create a sense of fear and urgency and hope to spark direct action protesting. These images are of some of ACT UP's protest, and in the middle they have the poster that was used at many of these protests with the symbol of the pink triangle and the slogan "Silence equals death." There were many societal and political events happening in the 1980s, but many categorized this time through the AIDS pandemic and the protests and demonstrations by ACT UP. Up until the 1980s, there was little knowledge and research put towards how people were infected with and developed AIDS. HIV was often referred to as the gay plague, which sparked ACT UP's element of being united in anger. President Ronald Reagan remained silent about the AIDS epidemic and had not mentioned anything public for at least 5 years since the first case of HIV. This constant neglect from society, government, and the media increased the LGBT community's outrage. This is a timeline of ACT UP's important protests and demonstrations in the beginning of ACT UP's history. Beginning with March 24th, 1987 was the first Wall Street demonstration where they demanded greater access to experimental AIDS drugs and policy that will help fight the disease. On April 15th of 1987, at the post office demonstration is where the posters that said "Silence equals death" and the pink triangle came to be. On September 14th, 1988, the New York Stock Exchange demonstration is where 7 ACT UP members chained themselves to a balcony at the stock exchange to protest the insanely high price of the only approved AIDS drug, AZT. Several days after the demonstration, the price was lowered from $10,000 to $6,400 per patient per year. On October 11, 1988, was the FDA shutdown, where members of ACT UP had shut down the Food and Drug Administration for one day. The media reported that it was the largest demonstration since demonstrations against the Vietnam War. ACT UP fought for the FDA drug approval process to become quicker in order to save more people. On December 10, 1989, the Stop the Church protest was where about 4,500 protesters attended the first Stop the Church action to protest the Catholic Church's deadly homophobic and misogynistic AIDS and abortion policies. On January 22nd, 1991, the Day of Desperation is where activists John Weir and 2 other activists entered CBS Evening News and shouted, "AIDS is the news, fight AIDS, not Arabs," in the beginning of the broadcast. The next day, activists displayed banners in Grand Central Station saying "Money for AIDS, not war," in response to the government's spending on the Persian Gulf War instead of putting money towards research and funding for the AIDS epidemic. And on March 24th of 1997, ACT UP celebrated its 10th anniversary. There were many responses to the ACT UP protests and demonstrations, including police brutality. A New York Times article from March 30th, 1997 discusses police response to ACT UP demonstrations, and ACT UP members states they were punched, grabbed, kicked, and verbally harassed by a police officer during the demonstration on Wall Street. There were also many counter movements to this, including the Catholic Church opposition, which prompted the Stop the Church demonstrations. And another one was one titled "Save Our Kids, Keep AIDS Out," which parents were protesting against the New York City public schools because they were allowing admission to children who were infected with HIV to come to school, and this sparked fear to the parents that their children could also be infected. These two pictures depict two different kinds of protests. The first one is a large gathering with posters. One poster saying "AIDS, where's your rage? ACT UP." The other one is from the Day of Desperation, where people hung banners in Grand Central Station, and these say "one AIDS death every 8 minutes." The impact of these protests from the 80s and 90s still have a lasting legacy today, and today ACT UP continues to fight for sustained investment in AIDS research for new medicine and treatment, equal access to prevention and care, and breaking down stigma, discrimination, and poverty related to HIV and AIDS. ACT UP brought a sense of power to the LGBT community, and they were made visible to society, the media, and government. And on December 1st every year is World AIDS Day, and this has been celebrated since 1988. This day is dedicated to raising awareness of the AIDS pandemic and to remember those who have died from